Good morning.
Good morning. You guys know Soren, right?
I've been introduced. And I'm not going to say much, but we were talking backstage, and Tim's like, "You going to join us?" I was like, "Sure." So professions, work, and the world, and mindfulness and wisdom. I think that there's a lot of questions that we explored yesterday. I know, Goldie, you were here for part of the day, about actually how we bring this into work environments. So I want to touch on that, and then I also would love to touch on a passion that I know both of you have, which is how do we bring more mindfulness into the larger world, that's children in schools and just larger society. So touching on the profession piece, I thought a good place to start, Goldie, would just be to hear from both of you, but starting with you, about how this whole domain became of interest to you, and how it was to be a very, very successful actress at a time when my guess is there wasn't a lot of mindfulness in that world around you, and just kind of how you began to get an interest and apply that to your work life.
I started out, as a dancer, and I had a very, very strong idea of what I was going to be when I grew up. It was a plan that I made, and it was kind of a life strategy that I had then. And being a dancer actually is really a mindful practice, because as I started at 3, I knew where every piece of my body was at every moment, and my mind had to be connected to that. So it gave a great beginning, right, to the practice. However, when I was dancing, and I was very happy, and I was on the road to dancing in TV shows and stuff, I got pulled out of the chorus by an agent, and he asked me if I had an agent, and I said no. And he said, "Well, I'd like you to see me." So I went to see him. Of course, I forgot about it. Because, being in New York and a dancer, not everybody was full of their right promises for the right reasons, and I was getting used to that. And I thought, so he doesn't really want me to be part of this. So I went and I got this William Morris, and they said, "We'd like to represent you." And here I'm a dancer. I got confused there, and then suddenly they sent me to an audition, and I was absolutely wrong for the part, and I got confused there because I got the part. And I said, "But I'm too old. I'm too young for the part." And they said, "No, we're writing another part in for you." So my life changed dramatically. My course was, I was taken off course, right? So now I'm on television, but what interestingly happened to me there as an actress is that I became panic-stricken. I had unspecific anxiety, panic attacks. I couldn't go into public. I was very, very frightened. My world had changed. What I knew to be true, the walls of the things that I knew were not there any longer. My reality had shifted. I thought I was going to go home, get married, have a white picket fence, have children, and open a dancing school. That was it. And I was pretty good, So with that anxiety, which a lot of these kids are doing today, and obviously they're taking drugs and they're doing all kinds of things because they're unsettled, they don't have a practice, they don't have a sense of self, I had something really amazing. I worked really hard from 3 years old up to be the best dancer, and I could dance. Therefore, I knew I had to do something to get myself better. I went to a doctor.
This is at the height of your career?
This is the beginning of when everything was exploding. It was laughing, it was this. And, I lost my smile, really. And it was very scary because I was forcing it. I was forcing my smile. So I went to the doctor. I spent 9 years in therapy. I learned about everything I could learn at that time about myself, about my past, about my family, all the things that we fear, all these areas in our lives that close doors for us. We don't want to open them. And then I started meditating. I was initiated in TM because luckily it was the 70s, and that's when, the world was booming. Everyone, even women, were throwing their bras away. I mean, it was just everything was possible, right? So in that land of possibility and potentiality, I literally started meditating. And when I did, I realized the first time that I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat. And my first time that I ever meditated was the most extraordinary revisiting of my true nature. And my true nature was joy. And my true nature was ability to perceive around me and have a sense of balance, which I grew up with. So in terms of that, it brought me back to a place of productivity, of feeling back in my body again. I felt my joy again. I felt wonderful. It was a healing experience. So that is how I got into this world. So that was 1971, 72, beginning of the 70s. So that's the beginning of my trajectory into this particular field that we're in right now.
Wow, great.
How did you get into it?
I'm still waiting.
I know you weren't a dancer.
I'm still waiting for my career to explode. You know? And then we'll talk, and then you can advise me.
Oh my God.
You know, what drove me to meditation was working for the United States government.
There's answers in there, that's for sure.
Can they hear us out there? Or is it just me and you chatting?
You know exactly.
Yeah, don't think about anybody else.
No. Yeah, it was kind of a similar in the sense that it was just this accumulation of stress and pressure and commitments and time and fundraising and all the things that you have to do as a congressman, and then moving up into different positions in House leadership was more responsibility. And then in 2006, I'm a Democrat. Democrats took the House back. Then I got a slot on the Appropriations Committee, which is a lot more responsibility. And so all this stuff by 2008 just kind of came to a head in the summer. And then Ohio is a very busy political state, as you may know. And thanks for all the money you send to people running for office in Ohio. But the TV commercials are tough. But then you get there and you're in Ohio and you're campaigning in 04, 06, 08, traveling the state. That on top of everything else. And then in the middle of 2008, I was 35. I was fairly young for a politician in Congress and was just about ready to get burnt out. I wasn't burnt out, but I thought if I keep going down this path by 40, I'm going to be totally fried. And knew I had to jumpstart a practice. I had different forms of meditation, centering prayer, things that I had flirted with growing up. My family's Catholic, a lot of rosaries in the house, in the car, strapped everywhere, bedposts, you know. But it was a legit practice, you know. For my grandparents, I'd sneak up. They lived 2 blocks away. I'd drive my bike down their house, radio off, TV off. They'd be praying the rosary. So there was an appreciation for some contemplative practice. And by 08, I thought the only way I'm going to have a daily practice, because I knew the days I did it, I was more centered, more focused, more relaxed, all of that, that I needed a daily practice. So I went on a retreat 2 days after the November election. And it was a 5-day retreat with John Kabat-Zinn. And it was just, you know, an amazing experience in the sense that, you know, you check your 2 Blackberries at the door, no reading, no writing, no phone calls, and your mind just settles down. And towards the end, he would do different chunks of quiet time. So he would say, you know, don't talk to anybody at lunch, and for the next 3 hours, then we'll come back and talk about, you know, what was happening when you were sitting in a cafeteria with 60 or 70 people and nobody was talking. That's a kind of a weird experience to have at first. And you're staring at your coffee, you know, and you see the steam coming out. And you're like, wow, look at that. Does that come out of there every day? So you get the sense that that you're missing things. You know, you'd hear the forks and the knives on the plates and all of that. And so towards the end, there was a 36-hour period of silence. And towards the end of that, we were doing a walking meditation. It was up at Menla. We were doing a walking meditation. I just had this experience of my mind and my body being in the same place at the same time and synchronized. And it reminded me back when I was a lot younger playing sports of being in the zone, you know, where you're just in that effortless kind of flow. And it lasted about a second and a half. And then, you know, the thoughts start coming back in. But that was, to me, where I started every day making sure that I had some quiet time. And it was because of the stress. I'm not unlike many other people.
So, it's interesting how each person gets to it differently. How you move into this realm. for different reasons, and we were talking kind of about this wisdom, and understanding where does wisdom come from? How do we, get there, and how can we actually change, those of us who are thought leaders or so forth, change the trajectory of the world at large to understand these practices. And, some people come to it for other reasons, or they come to it from different doorways. So some won't come through it through meditation. They might come through it through acts of kindness, or they may come to it through understanding what empathy really is. So it's an interesting question. I've been thinking a lot about it, about what is wisdom, and how do we break it down to be able to create and make it that ripple that ripples out to change the way the trajectory of people's perceptions and how the world moves.
That's what
it is really so wonderful about this organization that you've created in these sort of gatherings and moving it out in the world. It is. I know that what we're doing with the kids, for instance, is thinking, well, I don't know. I didn't know if I wanted to start at Congress and the Capitol, or whether I want to start with children. But you can see that the world itself, without
Well,
I was going to say last time we were talking, the one thing about us is that, we want to be liked, those of us in the industry, show business and, Washington. I grew up in D.C., so.
I told her, throw in youngest child into that mix and you're a mess.
Oh, my gosh. But, when we look at how we're going to change things, you're in a world that you actually could navigate a little bit of wisdom inside of the world that you're in. Do you find that difficult?
Yeah, it's tough. I think a lot of people don't. This is not on the radar screen, and I think part of what we're trying to do is to present this in a way that's not intimidating to people. Like you said, any door you want to walk through to get there is your own business, and fine. But I do notice that, as probably a lot of us do, that when it's presented or just there, how people start getting interested in it if there's a little bit of space. And so at the end of last year, I started a quiet time caucus in Congress. So in Congress, there's a rock and roll caucus, there's an arts caucus, there's an autism, there's like a caucus for every issue. And so I said, the hell with it, I've got a book, I'm on TV, I'm at conferences. It's not like I'm hiding from anyone with like my practice. So we started this quiet time caucus where we go to the Speaker's Chapel, which is just off of the Rotundo in the Capitol building. And it's a beautiful little quiet space. And it's quiet time, and you can come in there and you can do centering prayer, you can pray the rosary, you can take a nap, you can, mindfulness practice or whatever, but there's a space there. And I've noticed just in the last 6-8 months, because every week we send it out, we do it a half hour before votes every week. I notice now that when people are stressed out, members of Congress are stressed out, they make their way over to me.
That's awesome.
And they say, well, don't clap. They don't do anything about it.
That comes later.
But they come over and they say, I'm stressed out of my mind. What is that stuff you're doing? And Annie Sokoloff from my staff is here. We put together every week a staff meeting where we have different practitioners come in for staff members and members of Congress. But every week, whether they're working with veterans or doing educational stuff or all kinds of different things, where they come and they lead a half-hour meditation, may talk a little bit. Liz Stanley has been there, who's doing the military stuff. Linda Lantieri has been there, who's doing the education stuff, and points in between. But now staff members are starting to gravitate, and it's great to walk out of one of these sessions and there'll be 3 staff members standing there outside in the hallway, and it's in one of the office buildings right in D.C., and you hear them going, oh my God, I need to do this every week. This is unbelievable. And to hear it resonate with people, just speak, and it's not mandatory, you don't have to come, it's just with our Addiction and Recovery Caucus, and Annie coordinates it, we just have a room. And people just are more and more showing up now.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
I love hearing. I didn't know that. That's really great. That's just great.
We need to talk more.
We know. I told you.
So I'm curious, once you started like this inner practice, and I like, Goldie, that you had mentioned that there's all these different doorways in. How did your relationship to your work change? Because you're both in occupations where you could say that there's a lot of identity at play and a lot of ego at play, and people are expected you to participate in that and to kind of join in that. And I'm sure in Congress, there's pressure to behave a certain way, react a certain way. Tim, come on, get angry about this. We have to fight them. Whatever the notions are. So, did you notice any particular behavior, and how do you stay involved with an effort where people are largely identity based and you're coming from a different place?
That's a really, really good question. I know you want me to answer that one. Is in my world, because obviously it's very, very similar in terms of ego management. Working within our industry, it's also about how people look. So it has about aesthetics, or it has to be a certain self-centeredness, or an aspect of narcissism that is very, very difficult to get over. It's a tough one to jump. And when you're dealing with a movie, for instance, and I can deal from it from Marriage Dilemmas because I've produced and I've been acting in them. So from a producerial point of view, it makes it difficult in the way that you have to deal with sometimes very difficult actors. And as a director, which I've done as well, you're also looking at how you handle the fear. It's all fear-driven, but you have to understand it. So it is a step back. It is looking at the whole picture, right? Because there are a lot of people that don't. Actors are hired to do a job. We're pawns on a board, right? So that actor oftentimes isn't looking at the bigger picture. He's looking at what he's doing or she's doing. What the director is doing is looking at the whole picture. But I remember directors who would scream and yell and intimidate people and hurt their feelings, and it was just unthinkable to me. And I have to say that there are other times when I did a movie, and it was a big high budget movie and whatever, and there were elderly people on the set, and they weren't feeding them. There was no food on the set. There was no mindfulness in terms of that. And the only thing that I could do, because I wasn't producing, I was hired, is that I stood up and I said, I won't go out until you have food for these people. There's a 90-year-old man, it's 11 o'clock at night, and there's apples. There's nothing there. So, and he doesn't have an assistant to go out and get him something. So the only thing you can do is stand for your own integrity. But I will tell you, it's very, very important, and it's a great teacher because it's very disruptive. So when you're dealing in, whether it's an office or whether you're dealing with ego inside of whatever this is, how do you get to the whole picture? What are you trying to do, guys? You're trying to make a movie. Are you trying to tell a story? This is what you have to look at. What's the end game? And then you back up and figure out the best way to create the best product, which is the end game, without getting your ego involved or becoming reactive in a way that actually will destroy relationships and destroy the process. So so I think that for me was probably the greatest teacher and some of the most difficult aspects of management of personality, ego, and so forth. So that's I mean.
I think it's tough. I mean, I still struggle with it. I mean, it's like we all do say a lot of things you want to pull back in, and I say them on C-SPAN. It's like, was the cameras on for that one? Because I want to take that one back.
Yeah.
And you get mad, and you're in the heat of advocating for your point, And I have noticed that I'm not as angry as I used to be when I first got into Congress. I was 29 years old and all of that, and now I think I've recognized through practice, just calming down and seeing where the other side may present an opening in a debate, where if you're really angry, you're going to miss it. And I talked at Georgetown Law School the other night and made this point as a lawyer. We were talking about lawyering and how, if you're getting really mad in the courtroom, you're going to miss really listening to the other side. And they will, because they're human, leave an opening somewhere. Nobody's perfect. Will you be present enough? Will you be aware enough to find that opening? And you can feel like, if you're in a committee hearing, it'll be like almost a U-shaped, and I'm on this side with my team, and they're on the other side with their team, which is part of the problem. in Washington, but you're looking at them and it's just, they say something and you just, you feel your butt, and you reckon, I'm clinching, what am I going to go punch this person right now? No. Right. So just calm down, relax, make your point. And quite frankly, politically, no one wants a vote for someone who's angry. They want a hopeful leader. Make your point. You could make your counterpoint, and in a way that the average person listening would say, I like what that guy said better. He made more sense. Yeah. But if you're not calm and present, you miss those opportunities, which I still do all the time, but just a little bit less now.
Yeah, passion is an interesting thing, because those of us who feel passionate about something, I've been there before. It's too long. We don't have enough time, but there are so many stories where my reactivity, or where I felt offended, or I felt my integrity was offended. I did become, I asserted my opinion. Being a woman also, it makes it difficult, because then all of a sudden, you're a bitch, You say things the way they are, and it's like, well, wait, she's trying to take over. So that's another issue. I'll do that at the women's conference. It is interesting how skillfully we have to be great listeners, like you said, which is an art of in itself, to be able to be great leaders, I want to just circle back, because I want to look at something which we all would like to do. And I think one of the reasons why I got into this with children is because I was looking at what was going on in Washington, to tell you the truth. Did I ever tell you that? Mm. Yeah. You weren't included in that problem. But this was during the Iraq War. And I personally had a personal perspective, and you all may have a different perspective, but I felt that there wasn't enough oversight. I felt that basically they didn't have enough experts in there to really talk about the end game or the longer trajectory, to have a bigger, longer 100,000-foot-up perspective on what the end game was going to be. And the idea of going into Iraq for me was a very serious problem, because I could see the destabilization of the Middle East because of it. And I saw that it would eventually become a petri dish of terrorism, which it has become. So anytime you create chaos in an organization, that's when people can come in and take over. And that has to do with our organizations. It has to do with the government. It has to do with anything, family, anything. It's just a law of nature or physics, probably. But that's when I put together the program. Because I thought, if we can't have greater thought leaders or leaders in our government, or the people that basically are the leaders of the world, how are we going to diminish this reactivity, this fear-based action? What is it that we're going to accomplish with no ability to quiet yourself, pull yourself up, and look at the whole picture, right? So I put this into the schools, but what I decided to do was put neurology into it, because obviously the meditation wasn't flying too well 11 years ago. And we wanted to scale this. This was something that was not, we had to create knowledge. It was just not experiential, it was also cognitive. So how do you create a cognitive approach, an experiential, a visceral approach, and also an approach that actually engages the community, that creates neurological shifts? So it's not just how we change. We tell someone not to bully, or you tell someone not to be reactive, or you try to give them tools. The tools are I look at it as a holistic view of how we approach our own selves. It starts here. It starts with us. So if we teach our children what happens to their brain when they're angry or scared or fearful, they now have a tangible connection to that emotion. They literally have context. They know that their amygdala is going crazy. They know that they're in frenzy. They know that they can't think, because the wise old owl, the prefrontal cortex, is going, "Will you shut up in there? I can't think." That's what they're learning. So when they learn that they can't think because the amygdala is going crazy because they're angry or hurt or their best friend pushed them on the playground, we're giving tools as to how they quiet down that limbic part of the brain. In doing so, they have 3 times quiet time. I didn't call it meditation. It's a brain break, because the brain needs a break, because the brain is our friend and it's our tool. So once we look at things that way, I felt that there'd be a way to make sense of this scientifically rather than looking at it as necessarily a meditative practice, which is, it's a step away, but it's also an entree in. Because anytime you quiet your mind for children, and by the way, they ask for longer periods of mind quieting because they love it. And when they tell me at 7 years old what their amygdala is doing, I weep. So one little boy said, "Why'd you do?" He was 5 years old. He was 6 years old. He said, "Because my amygdala was overactive and my prefrontal cortex wasn't thinking." So this isn't going on in a school in Colorado. Anyway, so this is the kind of other way to get into the ways of finding mindfulness and approaching thinking and understanding how we learn not to be so reactive.
Yeah, and I think in an office setting where you're managing people, you start to realize how you can, by reacting in a way to a situation, and you tell a staff member or someone to do this now because I'm mad about this or that, that then sends a ripple out throughout the office of activity that at the end of the day could be a big waste of time because you were mad. Yeah. And so I really have come to see this as prevention in a big sense of preventing you from doing things that will waste a lot of time and energy. And in today's world, it seems like there's such a limited amount of time to get things done. There's limited resources, whether you're in government or the private sector. There's downsizing. There's less people doing more work. So as a leader or as a worker, the skill of not causing problems, not wasting time, is really a way to become more efficient in a sense. And I know that's not what the practice is about, but I think it's a side benefit of it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really happening today in terms of people, because everybody has such reactivity to things, is I notice that emails and I notice that texts, people take wrong. They misinterpret them. And we are all just ink blots, really, too. We don't know. We're so separate. Everything is different. We are assuming a role in society where we think we're doing the right thing. We all think in one way or another we're helping the cause. And yet you can get an email from someone that makes you so angry, that is so misinterpreted. And so I look at this and say, we need to speak to each other. Because that's where goodness and happiness and joy comes from.
Speak to each other directly.
Directly. Pick up the phone. Don't text. Don't consider. We, abbreviate. Sometimes we say things that look like it's a nasty thing to say, and we really didn't mean it that way. So communication is a vitally important thing.
Or if you don't get a response to your email or text.
That's right.
Oh my God, are they mad at me? Did I do something? What was I? Oh, last time I saw them, I said this, that, or the, so it's just like,
So
if people email you and they don't get a response, just call yourself.
That's right.
Yes. Perfect. Exactly. Wait.
Give me a call. When I haven't left it at home just for self-preservation, You have your break.
But I think what you're touching on is there's often when you can hear somebody's voice or you can see them, the empathetic ability just is much more responsive than when something digitally comes through. It's harder to really feel the person. And what we're seeing in a society is society gets busier and faster and more information, that there's this tendency to feel like we can get rid of the human-to-human part and still have a healthy society. And I hear what you're saying is like, no, this is actually the core of our society, is being able to connect and empathize.
It is. A society that's losing empathy is actually on its way out. Yeah. And that culture is in a bad downward spiral. Yeah. So we're creating empathy in the classroom, but you can do this in your work. You can do it in your neighborhoods. You can do it, with your sanghas. That communication is what brings joy, happiness, because we're hardwired for it. It's here. It's all in our brain. We are hardwired to connect. We started out in circles, during the agrarian period, right? So that's how we started. We should continue to work in circles.
And I think that's really politically the problem today in our civic discourse or lack of civic discourse, is that a friend of mine writes a column in the Youngstown Vindicator. In one of his columns, he said he grew up in Buffalo. He said, I grew up in Buffalo sitting on the front porch with all the neighbors, Now I live in Poland, Ohio, which is a suburb of Youngstown. Now I live in Poland on my back deck with a fence around it. And that kind of indicates the separateness that we have today. And in Washington, it's the same thing. Back in the day, members of Congress would live in D.C. They would pay for one trip back home to your district a month. So for 3 of those weeks, you were in D.C. and your family was in D.C. And there's great stories of Lyndon Johnson's wife and Gerald Ford's wife being friends. And, it's hard to, get on the House floor and want to choke somebody if your kids are playing Little League together that evening, and there's just not that anymore. But the reality of it is, as a politician who's got to get reelected, if you're in D.C., you're part of the problem. See? Oh, he moved to D.C. He moved his family to D.C. My buddy Joe Crowley, who's a member here in New York, he moved. His kids are, I think they were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right in that range. So he moved them to D.C. so he could see them. So he could take them to school, so he could go to their ball games and all that stuff, because otherwise he'd be in D.C. 3 or 4 nights a week. Well, the New York Post follows him and his wife around in Washington, taking pictures of the car that says, my son goes to such and such school in Virginia. Yeah. So he's got to go back home and say, do you want me to be a good family guy? Right. Or, what do you want from me? Right. And I think if we all were maybe a little more connected and mindful, that wouldn't be a judgment we would pass upon on our. Yeah. There's plenty to judge us on. Trust me, we're at 9% approval in the polls. So there's lots of opportunity to be critical of how we're rolling these days. But that, to me, is an indicator of, something's not right if we don't want our congressmen to make that choice. Mm-hmm. Something's wrong with our values.
Would you guys be open to some questions? We can continue. We'll continue. But if you have a question, be mindful of it. And I want to let you finish what you were saying, Goldie, and then in about 5 minutes, if you want.
I could go on forever. Let's do a question. But that's okay.
So we have 2 mics, so it's better to. I think Renee over here.
I have a quick question. For me, at the heart of wisdom is compassion. So, Congressman Ron, when you're on the Hill and you're dealing with the Tea Party folks and the obstructionist personalities, and where do you find your compassion and be able to listen? And how do you bring your practice to work in those interactions?
Well, they're fathers, they're mothers, they're human beings, they got kids, someone died in their family, they're human. And so you've got to look past the personality in some instances. In many ways, you can have a private conversation with someone who says, I don't really agree with what's going on here, but they've got to vote that way because that's what their district is. And that's a whole other discussion and probably a whole other conference on why that's that way. But I think in their hearts, many of them think they're doing what is right. And so as mad as you get, they're not bad guys. You'll see them in the gym with their kid on that they bring their kids to D.C., or you'll see them at the congressional picnic and playing with their kids. And so it's very human. But the problem is, I think there's not enough of those times where we can really interact like that, and quite frankly, they probably think the same about me. They probably think someone's asking them at their church on Sunday, how can you be nice to that Tim Ryan guy up in Ohio? What a jerk he is. And so in some sense, we're both in the same club, and of trying to figure out how we make this work. So it's not always easy, and your temper can get the best of you. But the short answer really is it's hard sometimes. As I'm sure it's hard for you to try to.
My question's for Congressman Ryan, and it's a bit challenging, but yes, I've got way more challenging questions for the other Congressman Ryan, so I think you'll be able to handle it.
Okay.
Goldie said a great thing a moment ago, which was it's a side door but an entree in. Okay? If a conservative congressman from my home state of Iowa, who wasn't named Steve King, came to you and said, I want 10 minutes of silence in public schools every day to start off the day where people can pray, meditate, do whatever they want. What would your reaction be?
Fine. 10 minutes quiet, do what you want in your own head. Mm-hmm. Fine with me. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's exactly why we did the Quiet Time Caucus. There's no rules here. You can come in, like I said, take a nap if you want.
This actually was very enlightening. It got sort of my question of yesterday morning about managing temperament and tempers and temperament, right? When you're in the middle of a crisis, and both of you, I'm sure, have had the experience, and you're trying to create that time and space, but you also need to enforce boundaries and communicate boundaries, and it's a crisis and time is compressed. Do you care to say a little more or say something about managing in that environment? I was on trading desks during the crisis. My spouse was on trading desks during the crisis. And we understand the need sometimes to escalate or raise a voice without having it turn into something counterproductive or constructive. And I'm sure military folks run into this all the time in firefight. Yeah. So time and space, constructively interacting and engaging with people either on the same side of you or on the opposite side of you. And managing those boundaries and navigating those boundaries and still maintaining the dispassion or compassion that's necessary for the situation.
That is a very tough, patting your head and rubbing your stomach. Really. I mean, because sometimes you do fly off the handle. We are human beings. We have a tendency to get fired up. There's no question. I think that it's the ability to witness your firing up and the ability to apologize. Because it's important to know that we all have passion. We all care very deeply. And when we're put against time and space, then there is something that happens, which is reactive, getting it done, and raising your voice. And I think that this is part of it. It's, when you talk about compassionate leadership, it doesn't mean that you're quiet-voiced all the time. It doesn't mean that you're just sort of, passive or whatever. No, sometimes there's a lot of force for what it is that you want to get across. And it is done with love and your heart and compassion and for the right reasons. And then if you do something that you feel is unkind or offensive, it's up to us to say, I took note of that. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to say it like that. I was just under a lot of stress. I think that's really fair. But we're not always in the eddies of life and just sitting there. We get into those streams sometimes, and sometimes it takes us over. And
for staff managing, I think it's about making sure you already have relationships that they know that you care about them. They know they care about them. You appreciate them. You appreciate the work. You're thankful. You know that it's a team, and so that if you do have those moments, it's easier to, fix it because they know where you're coming from. They know what the relationship really is, and we're all human. On the other side, if it's more an adversarial relationship, I think that it has to be more of they know you're going to be straight with them, and that there may be things on TV and arguments that you got to make to try to extend of what all you want, but you have honest dialogue with them is actually what can happen. Because if you're in a negotiation, your public statements are to try to position yourself in a way to get a better deal for who you're advocating for. But if they know you're an honest broker, I think even in those moments where you would lose your temper, that you still have some foundation of some kind of connection.
I was just thinking, when you're watching Fox News or some of the other news stations, I don't want to say Fox, but the inability to listen is an extraordinary thing. And I really sometimes have to turn it off because that creates angst, anxiety, anger, frustration, brain frenzy. It's like the worst toxic cocktail that you could possibly be involved with. This goes into your brain. You try to make sense of it. And so this is what we're learning. This is what we watch. We're mildly addicted to this as well. I know I am. And so at the same time, that's not working for us. So it's not giving us the right tools, right? So we're trying to fight a tidal wave of people who have got all these opinions and don't listen. And one of the, I don't know who it was one of the guys was talking to a town hall meeting, and one of the girls got up and, she said, well, here's what I do for taxes. I mean, I think I would rather, pay the 50% tax. All right, you're a Democrat. You don't work. Okay. The other girl said, well, what I was thinking is that, the tax part of it is something I wouldn't mind paying. Okay, you're a Democrat. That doesn't work. I've never heard anything like I felt like calling you and saying, all right, you and I need to have a meeting. We need to have a mindfulness meeting. What in the world are you doing? That doesn't matter because you're a Democrat. It didn't work for me. So my point is, maybe I'm going off point here. Maybe I am. Am I going off point?
We're listening.
Not
Good.
at all.
Keep going.
You're on point. Please continue. Thank you.
Hi. I've worked with a lot of PTSD, and I did a lot of research because I got introduced to the concept of neuroscience and how it relates, how it helps with treatment for PTSD. And I'm trained in mindfulness meditation for my degree from Naropa. So I put them together and have found them to be very effective. And so Congressman, I saw so you're both of interest to me because, Goldie, you're combining both of them. And that's what I find to be really effective. And Congressman, I saw the videotape at the Wisdom Conference in San Francisco and the veterans who were talking about just how helpful that was. And it was really touching. And I was just wondering if you would kind of update us how that's coming along for our military personnel.
There's a couple of innovations going on within the VA, not nearly to the extent it needs to be, but where you will get some integrative restoration meditation, some healing touch in a few of the VAs. I'm sponsoring a piece of legislation that would bring integrative health to all of the VAs, create major centers of integrative health within the VA. So you're talking all of what I mentioned, acupuncture, functional medicine, all of these things that can help bring a lot of healing. And then there's a foundation, a Mindful Nation Foundation that I'm helping get started, that we're creating a Veterans Corps. And we want to get 30 or 40 veterans who are, part of the problem is we have a lot of vets who fall through the cracks. They won't go to the VA because they feel like they're going to get labeled post-traumatic stress, and they don't want anything to do with it. So, unfortunately, 6 months, a year and a half later, they take their own lives. So, this particular program is for us to get veterans who are into meditation or some alternative therapy, create a Veterans Corps, and then train them and get them together, and then send them out to the communities that they're from and almost do search and rescue missions. Go out and learn Facebook and how to utilize social media. Find these young men and young women who won't go to the VA. And then use local VFWs or American Legions that after World War II, they were a bar and a dance floor, and that was fine. Today, we don't need bars and dance floors. We need mindfulness halls and wellness centers. So how can we have these vets then go and utilize one of these facilities and take a team of folks who need this and lead sessions with them to teach them how to do, it could be mindfulness, it could be TM, it could be yoga, it could be Tai Chi. Like, it doesn't matter what this person gets trained in. Let them go and start up in their own community and begin recruiting. And the goal is to not only try to raise enough money to help pay these vets some kind of stipend, but my goal is that we can take that model to the VA and say, you're spending billions. Right. We need to put this money into hire veterans. Hire them. They need jobs anyway. Right. Hire them, train them, get them skilled in this, and deepen their practice over time, and then they can come together annually, biannually, whatever, to talk to each other, get some real teachers in there helping them, and then build a vets corps that can utilize in all over the country and have the VA put the billions and billions of dollars behind it. And that way, we're going to save a hell of a lot of money in healthcare costs. So you want to talk about preventing things. I mean, you're preventing funerals, which is the most important thing, and you can't even put a price on that.
I mean, there are 28 a day.
Yeah, it's
terrible. And
we're not going out. So this is something that obviously you can tell I'm very passionate about. And this, just quickly, this is not me. This is I went and did a tour of the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Center 2 weeks ago. They're teaching meditation and yoga, and it's like the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic. I mean, we're not making this up. This is like got a seal of approval of some pretty high-powered institutions that are promoting it. And why wouldn't we want to do that for our vets? And then if you get these vets to come back to communities that are well, maintain all of the skill sets that they learned as a Marine, for example, and then come back and become a teacher in a school with a mindfulness practice, you want to talk about transforming communities and having role models and leaders in the schools. That'll do it.
That'll do it.
That'll do
So
it.
tell us how.
Wow. So actually, we're out of time, and you guys are hanging out.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. We'll have lunch in a bit, but we'll also have a break in a bit. I'm actually not sure what's on the schedule yet, but they'll be around. And I just want to say, I want to thank both of them just for a minute. If people are interested in just staying connected to the Hawn Foundation or to the Mindful Nation Foundation, how do they best do that? We can send an email to everybody later, but my guess is a lot of people here would love to stay in touch with each of your efforts.
Yeah, Krishna is here, who's organizing it, and Nick York here. Nick, raise your hand. Where's Krishna? There he is, over here.
Oh, yeah.
Kim McNatt is actually our CEO. She's here, and it's at thehawnfoundation.org.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.